In this second video of my model rail project, I'm starting the foundations of the scenic side of things, getting some track laid and even running some trains. But first, a quick recap of what we did in video 1, which was to put in the batons for the alignment dowels, ensuring really good baseboard joints. Also spending some time getting a good finish, even on the ends and the underside of the board itself. We start part 2 by layering some foam board, which will be cut to the circular shape, giving us a flat foundation for track laying and also adaptable for low relief scenics. I'm using A3 sheets of foam board to minimise the waste, tracing the underside around the edge of the board before cutting carefully but firmly with a very sharp knife. As each board is cut, they can be put into position before marking the second cut. Another advantage of foam board is its lightweight, making our baseboard easy to move around. But it is relatively expensive, so we want to make sure we can use our offcuts for those bits that don't justify using an entire sheet. Ultimately, we'll be using 2 layers of 5mm foam board, which when we've cut all the pieces, we can start sticking down using some wood glue, spread evenly over the MDF for the base layer. Once stuck down, we can leave it to dry, held in place with a nice heavy object, before starting with the second layer of foam board, eventually covering the entire circuit, on which we can lay out our track where it's going to end up. With the basic board essentially complete, I'm just adding a way of keeping the boards securely together, for which I'm using loose pin hinges, which I'm spraying black to match the board itself. For these, I need to carefully mark the positions where they're going to go, and I want to cut in a recess so they lie perfectly flat on the surface. For this, I'm using a multi-tool just to cut the first cut, then a mallet and chisel the sides of the recess, and then using a series of parallel vertical cuts to the depth of the thickness of the hinge. We can chisel away the excess wood until we're left with a nice clean area, which we can clear up with the chisel. Checking with our hinge to see if it's deep enough. A little bit of clearing up, the surface is smooth. A perfect fit for our hinge. With each batten cut, we can push together the 2 parts of the join and position our hinge in place, ready for drilling for the screws. With one side screwed down, we can make any adjustments as required for a tight fit, screwing down the other side of the hinge. When we're done, we can pull the loose pin and test the fit of our join. With the baseboard joiners finally complete, we can turn our attention to the track laying, measuring in from the edge of our baseboard to ensure accurate concentric rings. Also helped with our set track level crossing for the gap between the tracks. Where the baseboards join, I'm going to be using these ProTrack rail aligners, the fitting of which we'll go through later on in the video. And now for a little secret. I prepare the board using a Stone Effect textured spray paint before laying the track, which makes the ballasting so much easier. Having marked out where the track is going to go, I can mask off the areas very roughly before taking the baseboard outside to spray the paint. As I'm working on a black surface, I don't need that much. just enough for an even coverage. Leave to dry, and then you can peel off your masking tape and newspapers. Finishing up with an already half ballasted surface to lay the track. With the track loosely positioned on half of the baseboard, I'm going to bring the second half up to meet it, pushing the joins together and inserting the loose pins into the hinges for really secure joins. The break in the textured spray paint is where the level crossing will go, which can now be positioned along with the other track until both semicircles of the first and second radius track are all in place. And once again, just checking the position of the track, distance from the edge of the board. We'll use that same measurement to mark the curved edge of the level crossing, which will need to be cut off. For this, I'm using a fine razor saw, cutting a sequence of angles until the approximate curve is done. This can then be sanded down to make it smooth. When we're happy, we can finally start laying some track. Starting with assembly of the level crossing itself, I'm gluing the various components together. Before gluing the assembly onto the baseboard, for which I'm using no more nails glue, paying particular attention to where the track itself will stick to the board. Once in place, we'll need to leave it to dry long enough for it to be really secure. The crossing is a really useful place to start the track laying, because it sets the distance between the two tracks, as well as from the edge of the board, making it easy to mark up where the tracks will meet the joins of the baseboards. And this is where our ProTrack rail aligners come in. Along with our alignment dowels, they should make for a really accurate joint to ensure no derailments and really smooth running across the joints in the boards. First of all, we need to remove 3 of the sleepers from under the track, cutting through the plastic with a very sharp knife and sliding them off the end of the track itself. Sleepers removed, we can see the track aligners neatly sit under the track to which they will be soldered. Before gluing anything, we want to check those measurements once again. For gluing down the track joiners, I've squirted some no more nails onto a convenient surface before coating both the bottom of the joiner and the baseboard itself. I can now clean up any excess glue with the end of a pointy stick. Before leaving to dry, I just want to check those measurements once again. Exactly the same process for the second part of the pair. Gluing the back of the aligner and the baseboard below before putting into place. Cleaning up any excess glue and of course that vital measurement at the end. Once in place, I can move on to the second set, the ones on the first radius track. Double checking my outside measurement, I can mark out the space between the tracks and the position of the rail aligner, which can then be glued down in exactly the same way. Leaving the track joiners to dry overnight, I can now mark out the position of the track itself before applying wood glue over the entire track bed, spreading out to form an even layer which will hold down both the track and a layer of ballast. Opinion seems to be divided on whether you should glue down the track or pin it, but if you're going to glue ballast anyway, the end result is much the same. With the track bed evenly covered with glue, I can fit the first piece of track into the level crossing, once again checking all of my measurements. Happy that everything is in exactly the right place, I can start sprinkling ballast. You'll see that with the textured paint and a relatively thin layer of ballast, I can achieve a pretty instant effect. I'll probably want to add more later, but for now I'm happy that I've avoided that bare baseboard look. Some tins of nails will just hold the track down until the glue dries. Repeat the process with the first radius track, marking out the position and removing the track for the glue spreading. But first I want to brush away any loose ballast that's left behind. You can see from the pencil marks that I actually changed my mind about the position of the level crossing, an advantage of all those dummy runs prior to the permanent stick down. Already thinking ahead, I've got a Metcalf Models cottage planned for that area. Spreading the glue in exactly the same way as before, I can fit the track and sprinkle it with ballast. Having double and triple checked my measurements, I'm now going to solder the rail to the track aligner. A couple of drops of liquid flux will help the solder flow under the rail itself, bonding to the metal on the track aligner. I'm starting with the outside edges of the rail, and it doesn't take too much solder to get a good join. I'm also putting a bit of solder on the inside of the track, but making sure I don't use too much, so there's no build-up that might cause problem with running later. While we have the soldering iron out, I'm going to turn my attention to the power supply to the track. I want this to look neat, in keeping with the general finish of the baseboard, avoiding the rough and ready look. For the barrel connector socket, I'm starting by drilling into the side of the board with a spade bit, conveniently the same size as for the alignment dowels. Fitting the socket for position, I can mark where the screw holes need to be, as well as a pilot hole for the screws themselves. I need to drill a shallow, larger hole for some bosses on the back of the socket. And I haven't messed up here, the socket is asymmetric and fits flush to the edge of the board. My power cables will be soldered to the track in this area, dropping down through this hole to the socket below and channelled under the track in this groove I'm cutting in the foam board. Feeding the first wire through the hole, I can tin the end of it with solder. Similarly, a little bit of solder on the contact makes for an easy join. I'm actually making a mistake here, bringing the wire to the wrong contact for the outside of the barrel socket. I'll be rectifying that later. But for now, I'm continuing the fitting, feeding the wires up through the hole and screwing the socket purely to the side of the board. And feeding the wires along the channel where they will pass under the track. As this is a DCC layout, both tracks will have the same power supply. Both inside rails wired to the same terminal and both outside rails to the other. I'll be soldering those joints later, but for now I just need to know that I've got them under the track, which I am laying in exactly the same way as before. And soldering the rails to the track aligners. Paying special attention to lining up with the rails on the other board, remelting the solder as required, and gently pushing into position. One last check that everything is perfectly lined up, both side to side and the surface as well. Back to our power supply cables. I've bent round the stripped end of the wire from the socket, which, with a couple of drops of liquid flux, I'm soldering to the outside edge of the inner rail. The other wire from the socket is soldered to the outside rail, both on the outside track and on the inside track. With the electrical connections to all 4 rails complete, the remainder of the track can be laid. The same procedure, careful measuring, marking out, gluing and spreading, fitting and laying, checking and ballasting. Finally, soldering the track aligners, making any adjustments for a perfect fit. For electrical continuity between the 2 boards, I've wired in some brass tabs soldered to the track aligners. I only need 2, as the inner and outer rails are already connected to each other. And with my Hornby Select controller connected, check each of the rails before finally running some trains.